Hello, everyone. Welcome to Keys to Operationalizing the Demand Unit Waterfall by Full Circle Insights with special guest SiriusDecisions. All right, thank you so much. Okay, so let's go back to the top. Where are you or your company in implementing? And here's what it says. 62% want to implement and are investigating it right now. 8% of you already implemented. Very proud of that top 8% there that's attending and want to learn more. So that's great. And then the second question was, prior to signing up for the webinar, how familiar were you with the SiriusDecisions Demand Unit Waterfall? So most of you have heard about it, read mentions of it, but want to dive deeper and haven't yet. And 23% had not heard about it. So we're glad that signing up for this was the way for you guys to learn about the SiriusDecisions Demand Unit Waterfall. That's great. And then finally, how far along are you in implementing the SiriusDecisions Demand Unit Waterfall? All right. So it's a good split. Want to implement it, and you're investigating how to do so. And 65% said you're only learning about it and you're kind of researching it for now, dipping your toes in. 0%, interestingly enough, have already implemented and using it right now. Okay, that's very interesting. Thank you guys so much for participating in that. Love to get started with this webinar. So again, my name is Fang Hong. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager at Full Circle Insights. And welcome to Keys to Operationalizing the Demand Unit Waterfall with special guest SiriusDecisions. Your presenters today are Terry Flaherty and Ross Graber, Senior Research Directors from SiriusDecisions. And we've got Bonnie Crater, CEO at Full Circle Insights. Our agenda today, we'll be going over first with SiriusDecisions, defining the demand unit waterfall. And then second, they're going to go into how to measure the demand unit waterfall. And then thirdly, they'll be talking about alignment of the organization via managing SLAs at your company and trying to align between marketing and sales. Then we'll transition over to Full Circle Insights, where Bonnie Crater will be talking about demand unit waterfall translation into Salesforce speak and how to measure that inside of Salesforce. And then she'll go into the full circle method. These are 4 of the pillars of marketing day-to-day activities in the marketing job in measuring. And this is planning, achieving, optimizing, and evaluating. And then we'll end with some summary takeaways and what we want you to really leave this session with. We'll finally have some time for Q&A where you'll be able to contribute and input your questions. Okay, so Terry and Ross, I'll let you take it away.
Excellent. Thanks, Fang. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, and thanks for joining. My name is Ross Graber, and I'm a Senior Research Director with SiriusDecisions. I'd like to start off by asking you to focus on your screen. As you'll see, we're showing a pretty complicated picture. And sometimes demand management can feel complicated too. Our image, it represents all of those people that we have to interact with when we sell and when we market. We've got masses of individuals in the picture, but there's not a whole lot of order to it. But once we click, we can appreciate that in many buying scenarios, there's an order which sits beneath this image. We just need to work a little bit harder if we're going to see it. Individuals are coming together as part of buying groups, and they're doing so they can solve business problems. When we can see and understand demand and buying groups in this way, it gives us the opportunity to be a whole lot more effective as we drive our demand. Now, in recent years, B2B marketers have made a whole lot of really great strides when it comes to creating and managing demand. But anyone who creates demand for a living can tell you there's still a lot of work that can be done. Lots of room for improvement. And making improvement really requires that we gain a fuller and a more accurate view of how buyers are coming together and making purchasing decisions. This is why we've developed the SiriusDecisions Demand Unit Waterfall. It's a new innovation from us, which redefines the ways that B2B companies can understand demand flow. So for today, Terry and I are going to introduce you to the demand unit waterfall. We're going to describe how the focus in the demand unit waterfall changes from a focus on leads to a focus on demand units. And we're going to talk about how to adjust your measurement and your operations to make sure that you can make the demand unit waterfall a reality in your organization. So as we go to the next slide, perhaps some of these pictures are going to be familiar with you. I know anyone using the demand waterfall today is going to be familiar with the image at the left because this is the re-architected demand waterfall, and we introduced that in 2012. Even today, it continues to do a really great job monitoring individual leads as they move through a demand process. This waterfall, it places a ton of focus on the handoffs between marketing and tele and sales because those types of handoffs are really critical to effectively managing demand. But our marketplace is evolving. So buyer behaviors are changing, the ways that marketers are planning is evolving, and there are a ton more technological capabilities that are available to us to help us understand buyer behaviors. We've got more capabilities today. So the new demand unit waterfall is meant to address each of these factors. And I'd like to show you what this can look like. The demand unit waterfall means that we're now tracking a newer concept, a demand unit instead of individual leads. And we're going to track this demand unit through stages of the demand waterfall. Now, Terry is going to describe in just a few moments in a fair amount of detail what demand units are all about. But for right now, I'm going to focus on the stages, and we can start to see those stages on the next slide. In the demand unit waterfall, demand units are progressing from targeted demand and active demand through stages of engaged, prioritized, and then qualified demand. That's all before demand units are hitting our pipeline and eventually closing for us. If you're familiar with the re-architected waterfall, we've provided for you at the right here a mapping of stages in the re-architected waterfall to the demand unit waterfall. So you can see that inquiries map to engage demand, while sales qualified leads are going to map to pipeline. Our next slide goes into just a little bit more detail as we start to describe the stages themselves. With targeted demand at the very top, what we're really doing is we're assessing the potential universe. How much demand could exist out there in the marketplace? We then move on to active demand, and active demand counts how many units of demand we have evidence of, evidence that they're actively in the market searching for some type of solution. And demand units can be active even if we don't know the individuals associated with those demand units by name. Once we reached engaged demand, that means we've been able to associate and name someone with that demand unit, and they've responded to us. We'll go on to prioritize demand once it's reached a threshold, which is sufficient typically for passing forward to a telefunction or a sales function. Qualified demand indicates that demand units have progressed further, and they've shown a willingness to engage with us before hitting pipeline, which is, as I'd mentioned, similar to a sales qualified lead, a stage at which we can project a timeline for closure, and we can also assess a financial value for that opportunity. And then when we get to close, what we're really talking about is winning, and winning is winning, and it means that we're being successful. So that is the demand unit waterfall and its stages. Now, Terry's going to talk to you in detail about the demand units, which sit at the core of the demand unit waterfall.
Thanks, Ross. I'm Terry Flaherty, and I'm also Senior Research Director at SiriusDecisions. And yeah, we get asked many times, what the heck is a demand unit, and why do we have this thing called the demand unit waterfall? And so let's go ahead and move to the next slide, and we'll talk about the building blocks of a demand unit. And conceptually, we think a demand unit is the foundational core, if you will, of demand. And for demand to exist, we think there's three key elements that need to be present, right? And for demand to exist, when we have these three elements, that's a point then in the market or a point in an account where we can invest marketing and tele and sales resources to try to stimulate that potential demand and turn it into a closed deal. And so these building blocks of demand that need to exist are really three things. And the first is the buying group. And as Ross talked about, when we think about, B2B world buying scenarios, we know that the vast majority of the time that it's a buying group that makes the buying decision and not a single individual. And so this is a major change that's occurred in the demand unit waterfall, is the recognition that what we're really trying to do is attract buying groups and move buying groups through the process as opposed to moving individuals. And that has big impact on metrics, as you'll see a little bit later, where we're measuring at the denominator, if you will, of our equations, a group as opposed to just the individual number of inquiries. So we have buying groups, but the other really key element that's required for demand to exist is that buying group has to have a business pain. Right, so we may have a buying group, for example, that is in the HR department, and they're formed in order to solve the business problem of improving the efficiency and accuracy of the hiring process. And so now that buying group has a purpose. They have a business need that they're trying to solve. And the last third component that we need for demand to exist is that our solution addresses those business needs in a viable way. And so when we have the combination of a buying group that has a business pain that our solution can address, then that's a point that we want to target, right? That's a point in the market, that's a point in the account where we want to target and invest marketing and sales and tele resources to try to attract and engage and qualify and convert and move that potential opportunity through a demand progression. So the demand unit, again, is what we're tracking. This is the new concept in the new waterfall. So let's go to the next slide, Tanya. And another question we always get is, so what's the difference between a buying group and an account and a demand unit, right? And so another new concept we introduced at the same time we introduced the demand unit waterfall was a construct we call a demand map. And a demand map is a way for us to help to understand where potential opportunities exist, where demand units exist in the account or at a macro level in the market. And so demand maps can be relatively simple, right? Where we have like a single buying group that we're targeting and we solve a single business need and we have a single solution. And we see that very often in startups, right? And so in that world, let's say I'm a marketing planning software company, right? And we're targeting a single buying need. We're targeting a single buying group. We have a single solution. So in that world, an account and a buying unit, demand unit are the same thing. But in many cases, it's much more complex, much more robust, right? We could be targeting accounts where we target multiple buying groups, we're solving multiple different business needs, and we can map our solutions to the intersection of the buying group and the business needs to give us a construct to identify all the potential demand units or all the potential opportunities that exist in the organization. So this is an example of what we consider a matrix demand map. We're targeting multiple buying groups, multiple business needs, and here's how our solutions layer in. And the key takeaway on this construct is that this represents the potential or the need for 9 different purchasing decisions, purchasing processes. And so, there's potential for 9 different versions or views into the waterfall because these are all potentially independent buying decisions. So in this organization, there's 9 potential opportunities that we may want to target and invest marketing and sales and tele resources to drive these potential opportunities to close deals. And so we want to measure each one because, over time, the account may move into and out of different buying decisions. And so we want to be able to understand from a penetration perspective, how much have we engaged in the account, what's still open, what resources, what go-to-market strategy do we want to leverage in order to drive the best engagement across that potential account. So demand map is really critical. It's what starts to link the demand unit waterfall to things like account-based marketing, right? It's a way to visualize that. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, Feng. And one of the questions we always get then is, from an operationalization perspective, how do we start to make the shift from, focus on individual leads, right, into a construct or a world where the thing we're measuring, the thing we're monitoring is actually a group of people in a demand unit, right, that has a business need aligned to a solution. And so there's a number of different approaches to do that, right? But a very common approach that we see is that we're going to leverage an entity that already exists in most Salesforce automation systems, and that's the opportunity entity, right? And the opportunity entity allows us to group multiple people together and associate it with that opportunity. So the people that are associated with the opportunity are the buying group. That opportunity can be aligned to business needs, and we also have a way then to measure it. So that's one approach that we see from an operationalization perspective, is to leverage the opportunity entity and just add and refine stages to represent earlier stages in the process in the demand unit waterfall. Now, other approaches we see are things like custom objects, or ways to consolidate views into the lead entities and tie things together at an account level. So there's a number of different approaches, and Bonnie's going to give you some examples and show you some reporting based on some of those different approaches. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And Ross, you want to talk about some of the things to consider when we think about measurement of the demand unit waterfall?
Absolutely. And where I'd like to start is, I want to start by highlighting the parts of waterfall measurement that have remained consistent between the demand unit waterfall and its predecessor. Because when we think about waterfall measurement's going to continue to focus on a few key factors. We're going to care about measuring volume, conversion, and velocity. We're going to be tracking demand progress from stage to stage. And in the case of the demand unit waterfall, it's demand units. We're going to care about how many units exist, how well they're converting, and how quickly. And as we look at that, we can also layer on factors like costs, so we can understand how our quantities compare to the amounts that we've spent on creating demand. And that gives us a measure of efficiency. But there are going to be some differences with the demand unit waterfall as well. And on the next slide, we can focus on those. And the biggest difference that needs to come across is the thing I am measuring is not the same. Whereas previously I may have been tracking individuals, now I'm tracking a demand unit. The entity changes. I'm also starting my measurement from a different and an earlier point. With the demand unit waterfall, I'm beginning with my market potential, so I can see throughout the demand creation process how my demand creation is comparing to what I believe the market possibilities represent. And the last element of difference that I want to call out is that we're going to see some differences in how we measure individuals and how we measure the handoffs between marketing and sales. While both individuals and handoffs continue to matter, with the demand unit waterfall, these are viewed as supporting metrics, metrics that I'm going to look to after I understand my primary factors around volume, conversion, and velocity. And as we go forward into the next series of slides, I'll be able to illustrate for you what some of these things can look like. Starting off with the things that are largely unchanged, or the primary metrics, we're talking about unit volume, conversion, velocity. And on the next slide, we have an example of what this could look like focusing on stages of prioritized and qualified demand. We can look at the quantities of demand units from each stage and also the stage conversion. So I'm going from 1,200 demand units to 400 demand units, or I'm looking at a conversion rate of 33%. We can also start to look at core measures around our stage velocity. How many days does a unit typically stay at that stage before moving forward? Or how does that volume compare to what it cost me to develop demand units at that stage in the process? These are all the types of things that we're going to want to look at to understand our primary measures of stage-to-stage conversion. Now, on our next slide, we'll see some of our newer features. And here we're thinking about measuring versus our market potential. Our target demand, that begins with an assessment of how much demand could possibly exist in our marketplace. We'll look toward how many companies and how many buying centers within those companies are out there that may be having a problem that could be a fit for our solution. That's the target demand potential that we're beginning with. Now, active demand is going to assess how many of those units are currently in the marketplace actively looking to solve a problem. And there are some ways that we can get a sense for those volumes. We can use intent monitoring solutions to get an idea of which companies and which parts of the companies are in the market looking for solution. But we can also look closer to home by looking potentially at companies with anonymous traffic to our web properties. That will give us a sense for active demand as well. Once we know they're looking, we want to be able to solicit a response from an individual that we can associate with those demand units. And once we can identify them, that's when we're reaching a stage of engaged demand. Now, on our next slide, we'll start to see some of the ratios, because what you'll sense in this image is that we're beginning with a large target market, 15,000 potential demand units. And we can compare that to what we have is currently engaged. In this example, it's 2% of the potential that we'd assessed. By looking at measures like this, it tells us what portion of our possibilities we're currently working with this. And if we do this at the demand unit level, that can prevent us from falling into a trap where we might say, hey, look, we've gotten thousands of responses, so we must be doing great. Well, the reality could be very different. We might only have engaged with a couple of hundred demand units. So measuring against market potential can help us avoid those types of mistakes and really understand where we stand relative to where we could be, because we don't want to go into this just making some of these broad assumptions that say more leads are better and more responses are better, and there's a never-ending supply of leads that we could be attacking, because the reality for a lot of businesses is that's just not the case. And by consistently measuring our performance versus potential, we can avoid some of those mistakes. Now, next, we're going to talk about individuals, because despite our move to demand units, we're still engaging with people. Marketing engages with people. Sales engages with people. And if we're going to understand our demand progress, we've got to have the ability to measure those people. We have to then take those people and be able to associate them with a demand unit. That's how we make it meaningful. So from the engaged demand stage onward, we're going to want to monitor things like how many individuals are being interacted with, and how does that compare to the total number of engaged demand units. We want to see if we're engaging with potentially 1, 2, 3, or more individuals per demand unit. It can also be valuable to understand how many responses are typically needed per individual or per demand unit when we're going to be successful and we're going to see stage motion. By measuring at the individual level, this is going to help us understand what that takes so we can start to gear our investments and our activities accordingly, because ultimately what we're trying to do is to progress our demands. Next, I'll show you what this could look like. Perhaps at the prioritized demand stage, we're averaging 2,600 individuals or 2.2 individuals per demand unit, or maybe even 3 responses per individual. We can also know how much it costs us to develop that level of engagement, and we can start to make different decisions based on our conversion rates throughout the waterfall. So if we're doing really well, we can say, well, are our averages of how many individuals per demand unit, are they right? What's going to happen if we increase that? Because ultimately we're trying to test out the combinations that are most likely to lead to us being successful so we can increase our efficiency rates. Once I understand individuals, I can tweak the ways that I execute. And that's really what waterfall measurement is about. Not only do I want to understand what I did, but I'm really looking to understand how I can make changes to ensure that I'm going to improve performance. And getting to that level of detail is something that requires me to look at individuals and compare them to our primary stage metric. So what we're doing is we're taking our primary measures of volume, conversion, and velocity, and we're comparing it to these supporting measures that will show me performance relative to the individuals. At this point, I want to hand it back over to Terry, and Terry's going to talk a little bit more about how we monitor the handoffs within the process overall.
Thanks, Ross. So one of the big questions that we've got about the new demand unit waterfall is what happened to the org structure? Because in the earlier waterfalls, we had marketing generated leads or tele-qualified leads or sales qualified leads. And now we've taken out the org structure completely. And we did that intentionally because what we wanted to do was focus on the progression of demand as opposed to who touches it. Right? And our belief is that every demand unit is going to go through the stages you see of target demand, active demand, engaged demand through that process. And so we wanted a way to focus on that and make that, if you will, the permanent part of the analysis. And the different part, the unique part that varies is actually the roles and responsibilities and who owns it. So when we're implementing the new demand unit waterfall, what we wanted to look at is potentially various go-to-market strategies that leverage a different mix of roles and responsibilities across marketing, tele, sales, and channel. Right? And so what I want to do is show you this is what the re-architected waterfall looks like mapped to the demand unit waterfall from a roles and responsibility perspective. And so here what we're seeing is, marketing is driving target demand, active demand, the early stage of the funnel through the scoring to the prioritized demand stage. We're going to hand off then to tele for qualification. They're going to take it to qualified demand. And you'll notice that there's an SLA unit, right, that manages that handoff. And so one of the things we absolutely need to measure and understand are all the attributes of that service level agreement. So the timing and when did that lead get accepted, or that demand unit get accepted, and how many touch attempts we made and who have we made touch attempts against. And so we'll look at what the SLA metrics from an operational perspective would look like in the demand unit waterfall. Continuing the process, we have tele then that gets to the qualified demand. That's conversations where we verified a lot of the assumptions about the demand unit readiness for sales, and when it reaches the threshold where we say it's sales ready, we're passing it over to sales, and again there's a service level agreement, and so yet another opportunity for us to measure that handoff process. And then in this scenario, sales is taking it to close, so they're doing a deep qualification and then the close process. If we click real quickly to the next slide thing, channel can be also a key element in our go-to-market strategy. And so here's an example of the demand unit waterfall, very similar all the way through qualified demand. And in this case, we're passing the lead over to a channel partner, and channel will take it to pipeline and close. In our next scenario, in the next slide, we may have go-to-market strategy where we want tele to be the function that drives outbound prospecting. So we may be getting signals, for example, at active demand saying, we believe this organization is in market for our solution, and we're going to feed that information as a signal to our teleservices team, and they'll be the one that drives the initial engagement, right? They'll send the intro email, they'll make the initial phone calls, take it to qualified demand, and then to close, pass over to sales. And then the last scenario, right, is a scenario where we may have sold our buying group our first solution, and now we have another solution to sell. And from a go-to-market strategy perspective, we're going to leverage sales as a primary resource that owns that relationship, and they'll carry in product too. And marketing absolutely can stay involved from an enablement and a resource and a tool perspective, but we're looking to sales to drive the demand for that second solution in the existing buying group. And so the key, as you see, right, is in a new demand unit waterfall, you have the flexibility to align the sales and marketing and tele resources depending upon your go-to-market strategy. But in every one of those scenarios we looked at, there's been handoffs from one function to another, and that function needs to be defined by an SLA. And so in the next slide, what we'll look at is a little bit more insight on how do we measure SLAs again, right? And so it's the same as what we saw before. It's the key elements of when did the handoff happen? Did we get acceptance of that entity that we just passed, to teleservices or to sales? Did they reject it? What's our acceptance rate? What's the timing? How many touch attempts? So it's the same type of metrics that are supporting metrics that are important for the operationalization of this waterfall. Now, let's drill down and take a look, for example, what that looks like from prioritized to qualified. So just to set context, prioritized is, the demand unit's been qualified through automation, and now we're passing over to teleservices. And so at the macro level, we may have an 18% conversion rate of, 900 of the 5,000 demand units that reach prioritized stage are now qualified. But to blow out or expand what's happening between prioritized demand and qualified demand, we may have a service level agreement of 5 or 6 or n number of touches. And from a measurement perspective, it's very imperative to be able to understand how many touch attempts have we made, what's the yield that we're getting from each touch attempt, how many are we disqualifying at each touch attempt. So there's opportunity for great additional insight on the operationalization of how we're doing from prioritized to qualified, given the fact that that required a handoff from marketing over to teleservices. So let's go ahead and move to the last slide for wrap up on our side, and then we'll turn it over to Bonnie. Some of the key takeaways, as we said before, we're changing perspective in the demand unit waterfall. We're moving to a scenario that thinks about buying committees and buying groups, and this demand unit becomes the core of our new waterfall, and measurement's still really critical. And we'll talk in a little bit about how we identify demand units. They're basically, the alignment of potential opportunities and business needs, buying groups and business needs. And there's different metrics that are involved in this. So there's the metrics that we consider the primary metrics, which are, around the stages of the waterfall and progression through the waterfall. But there's a number of supporting metrics like the SLA metrics that we saw that really help drive and understand, kind of the next level of detail, if you will, in the operationalization of this process. And so we don't overlook, and it's still vitally important that we understand and measure these handoff points as part of the way we track this waterfall too. So I want to thank you for your time. I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie, and she's going to show some examples of reporting and insight that's provided in their platform. So Bonnie, it's all yours.
Thank you, Terry and Ross. That was a fantastic overview of the demand unit waterfall. I'm excited about the demand unit waterfall for a couple of reasons. One is it evolves the SiriusDecisions waterfall to address the notion of account-based marketing, which has been an emerging topic over the last year. And and not only does it address it, but it's a really well thought out way of approaching the topic. The second thing I'm excited about around the demand unit waterfall is that oftentimes we take these models and then we simplify them for like a startup company. But not everybody is a startup company. We have large companies that have multiple products, and these large companies are selling to multiple buyers, and you have multiple sales teams. And so we needed a waterfall that actually would reflect that complexity. And I'm a huge fan, as you can tell, of SiriusDecisions, and I think these guys have done a really great job in modeling that. One of the things that really turned me on to SiriusDecisions was in 2011, I went to a SiriusDecisions event. It was the SiriusDecisions Summit, and I think we were in Phoenix that year. I was so excited to go. I'm a 5-time VP of marketing, and I love this whole idea of measuring marketing. And I got to the event, and I met all these people that were also interested in measuring marketing. It was really exciting. And then they had this thing called the waterfall. I got excited about that. And we actually built our whole company around these concepts of funnel metrics and waterfalls and so on, because as marketers, we felt it was so important to be able to operationalize all of these ideas inside a really nice system called Salesforce. And so that's our gig. This year, of course, the Tech Exchange is coming up. We don't miss that. That's on October 30th. We'll be there. And I learned something at every one of these events, and I encourage everyone to go. If you're a top B2B marketer, don't miss. And then the next SiriusDecisions Summit will be in Las Vegas, and that'll be in May. So we'll hope to see you all there. We started Full Circle, as I mentioned, because we were really interested in helping marketers just get better at their craft. I wanted to do that, and I didn't have the metrics that and the tools that I needed in order to do that. So I found myself in this situation, and this is where most of our customers and a lot of other folks find themselves, which is you have this fantastic marketing automation system, whatever it is, whether it's Marketo or Acton, Pardot, HubSpot, or Oracle Marketing Cloud. And as a marketer, you're using that system, you're doing great stuff with it, but the data is actually different than what's in Salesforce, and that's where the salespeople live. And so I found myself not being able to really get the right visibility into the impact that all the great programs that I was running on sales, and really understanding the process in detail of what was happening to every single lead, so I could track that and optimize how I was working with sales. And so that's what we built Full Circle. We built the application right on top of the Salesforce platform. And the big benefit there is that both marketing and sales see the same data, the same charts, the same everything. And so there's no argument about the data. That kind of eliminates the data argument. And you can just get right to work and work on optimizing your company. We started off Full Circle. Really, we were very interested in funnels. Funnel equals waterfall, of course. And the basic measurements that I wanted was volume, velocity, and conversion rates. I wanted to get that right inside Salesforce. I wanted to be able to set goals against these metrics, right? Say, okay, I wanted to know what my funnel is now, and then I wanted to know what the funnel is going, what the goal was. What do I want my funnel to look like in the future? And to really and to have a system that actually would help do that. So with the re-architected and renewed waterfall in the form of the Demand Unit Waterfall, we have Terry and Ross introduced the waterfall. It has all these new terms. One of the new terms, of course, is the buying group. And when I learned about the SiriusDecisions Demand Unit Waterfall for the first time, I was thinking about the buying group, and I was thinking about, okay, well, how does that actually work? And one of the things that we talked about internally here at Full Circle was, it's hard to know in the very beginning when you're actually, setting up your target accounts. Like, do you know everybody who's going to be in your buying group in the demand unit? And probably not. What tends to emerge is that there's like one person, use the word like, excuse me. There's one person who emerges as the leader, the proponent of the purchase, and that person we gave them a nickname, the Buying Scout. Thank you, Christine Vermes. She's our CMO, giving her a shout out for inventing that term. Anyway, the Buying Scout comes in, right? They are your sort of your first lead, a response to a campaign. And that Buying Scout might invite other people to a demo. And so your buying group emerges and grows over time. So that was one of the things I was kind of struggling with, but we got our head around it as, okay, this is how this thing is going to go. Okay, so we're Salesforce people. So we don't use in Salesforce. There's nothing called an active demand in Salesforce or engaged demand in Salesforce. What we have in Salesforce is we have objects. We've got accounts, and we've got leads, and we've got opportunities and contacts. And so we have all of these objects. And so we thought it'd be useful to translate this demand unit waterfall into Salesforce speak. And so target demand would be target accounts, and active demand would be active accounts. And you can read this yourself. Engaged leads, prioritized leads, qualified accounts, pipeline, and close. Let me explain this a little bit more. So in the beginning, right, you're identifying your target accounts, and there's activity in those accounts. You probably have gone out and on those target accounts and bought some lists and maybe turned those into, you might have turned them into contacts inside Salesforce. You might have put them into your marketing automation system to run campaigns against. There's social media happening. You're doing social media programs. There's unknown people that are unknowns, and they become knowns. All of that happens in your target accounts, and sometimes your non-target accounts. Then engaged leads. This is where some people actually might create an opportunity, right? If you, some companies might actually choose to actually create an opportunity here. And when you create the opportunity, the lead, of course, turns into an account, an opportunity, and a contact. That's the the standard process, assuming you're familiar with Salesforce. Moving down the funnel, you for sure have opportunities, right? When it becomes a qualified account, you've got accounts and contacts. On your opportunity, you're defining and you have opportunity stages, which is not part of this, but it's very important for the salespeople to move the deals along and progressing them through the stages so that the sales management can do forecasting and then hopefully close a bunch of deals. Let's talk a little bit more about opportunities. When you have an opportunity, right, you have a contact role on the opportunity, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Those are contacts that are associated with the opportunity. You have a need, you might put that need in the description. And then the third thing is you have a solution, and you might assign products with prices to the opportunity, which rolls up into the total amount. So these are all constructs that exist in Salesforce that map perfectly against a demand unit. When you look at the opportunity, you might have a scenario where you have one account, RodeoNet, right, and then multiple opportunities or multiple demand units. You might have separate accounts, right, and here we have two subsidiaries of 24Karat. We have the 24Karat Healthcare subsidiary and the 24Karat7 subsidiary, and each of those subsidiaries has different demand units. These demand units or opportunities are assigned to sales reps, and so you might have the same sales rep doing both of those subsidiaries, or you might have different sales reps in different sales groups. You might have a finance group and a healthcare group, which would address those demand units separately. But all of this is perfectly mappable right inside Salesforce. Very important is the contact role, right? And this is oftentimes been a challenging thing for a lot of us to get salespeople to put the contact role on the contact. We built a system to force that, by the way, but at least get one. But with account-based marketing, understanding who the contacts are associated with those opportunities becomes more and more important. And Salesforce has a very nice setup here. You select a contact. Here we have Marianne Moriarty. She happens to be the decision maker, and you can assign roles for each of those. So you can keep track of what kind of people are involved in every opportunity, and that can be useful as you're profiling your target accounts moving forward. So let's take a step back and take a look at how you actually use all of this in some sort of cohesive method. And so this year we introduced something called the full circle method, which many of our customers have found quite useful because it's a good way of just organizing dashboards, and running operations. So step one is planning. Every year we all go through these planning processes and try to figure out how many leads we need to generate for the next year. We also set goals associated with that planning process. Then achieving is measuring your activity against your goals and testing that out. Optimizing, of course, is measuring your how well you're doing your processes and how well your processes are performing. This is of particular there's a particular need here with the marketing to sales handoff. That's often a trouble spot for most folks, and getting that sorted out can actually really improve lead conversion. Evaluating, of course, is that last step, which is, hey, how are my marketing campaigns impacting revenue? And really prioritizing, not based on volume, but really based on revenue impact, can make a huge difference in the efficiency of an operation. So let's go back to the SiriusDecisions Demand Unit Waterfall and apply those to these different sets of activities. So the first thing is, okay, you got to set up your target accounts, right? You need to define who your target accounts are, what kinds of people are at the accounts that you want to contact, and then there's a process thing. You know, what does it mean to be qualified, and when do you want to? What kind of alerts do you want to have for your sales organization? Is it every response is the sales organization is alerted, or what? Many companies use account scoring so that there's multiple contacts. Many companies do not. So it depends on how you depends a lot on the volume and the quality of the marketing needs and kind of where people are in their customer journey of how you apply that. Second is in your planning stage, right? We talked about setting goals, right? So you want to, in this case, you've got a set of target accounts, and you want to, and you know what those target accounts are, and you're trying to measure responses against those target accounts. So when you have a demand unit, you have a marketing qualified account. You want to set goals around that, set goals around the sales qualification and account closes of those target accounts. And then really important, of course, is sharing all of these ideas with the sales team to be sure everybody's all aligned. One of the great things about these kinds of processes is it really gets the marketing team involved in the business. You have to know what the goals are. A lot of companies in the bad old days wouldn't share, you know, the CEOs and the VPs of sales wouldn't share what the sales goals were to the marketing team. So marketing is operating blind, absolutely blind. But if you use these methods, you're in the game. So that's one of the great things about using these different kinds of waterfall metrics. So of course, in the planning phase, you got to do a reverse funnel, and that means you need to figure out what your revenue goals are. You're in the game, figure out what the average deal size, you understand how the sales organization is operating, and then do a reverse count to figure out how many account wins you need, as well as and estimate what your conversion rate is. You can use that based on your previous year, try to improve it. Maybe things will get harder, maybe lower it, but anyway, then that gives you the number of marketing qualified accounts that are needed to get to that conversion rate. So then you project a cost, and that generates a budget. Of course, usually what happens is the marketing budget's too high. That always happens. The marketing budget's too high, so you have to go back and kind of refine these numbers. But what this does is it gets sales and marketing working together in this planning process. Let's just blow this out a little bit. Here's our ABM goals by quarter. So here we have Q1 through Q4. This is an even spread across all quarters. Most companies have some seasonality, but this is an example. So there's high season and low seasons and so on. So you have a marketing close to close percentage. So then you calculate the number of accounts closed in one and a total. And there's one thing that's missing here, which is velocity, and also planning for the following year. So usually there's growth planned for the following year. So you need to bump up those Q4 numbers, making sure you have enough leads to be closed in Q1 for that higher growth rate that's expected potentially in Q1. Different companies work differently, but again, this is a great way to get involved in the business of your company by doing this kind of planning. Okay, achieving. Achieving is all about measuring your progress against goals. Here we have a really nice screenshot right out of Salesforce with a set of target accounts. We know those are target accounts because we've checked the box. And we also have a way of measuring the number of, measuring the level of responses that are happening that recommend and show the activity level in an account. So it gives a guide for the sales team for doing follow-up. Here's some gauges right out of Salesforce for account volume goals. So here it's not, instead of, these might be leads, you might see leads normally in a gauge like this, but here we have marketing qualified accounts. So we've got our goal in Q1 and Q2 was actually in Q3, it was 125. And you can see that on this gauge in Q1 and Q2, the marketing qualified account numbers have been exceeded. So we've got lots of demand units for our target accounts. And in Q3, we're working towards the goal, halfway there. Here we've got some conversion rate trends. Okay, so these charts look a little different, some of the other ones. So this is on the horizontal axis, you've got quarters, right? Q2, Q3, Q4, and Q1. And what you're seeing here on the vertical axis is our conversion rates, right? And there's different conversion rates. This is marketing qualified accounts through to sales accepted account, right? And so those are hovering like 80, 85%. Looks like Q1 is a little lower. Might check into that, see why that might be. That's what these charts are all about, is to try to figure out why. Then in the conversion rate from qualified account to demo, looks like Q1 is off the charts. Might want to figure out why. Like, what were the sources? Why did that happen? What can you do to repeat that? Then we've got demo to one conversion rates. Looks like Q4 and Q1 are really low. What the heck happened there? So these charts are really useful in uncovering potential process issues, or just campaigns that didn't quite work. So you got to think of something else. You can also segment all of this information by salesperson, right? So you can see how each individual salesperson is doing. You can segment it by industry. Which industries are working? You got to have that industry data, of course, in Salesforce. Then also your target versus non-target accounts. If you're going heavy on account-based marketing and you're really focusing on those target accounts, it's interesting to compare how the marketing, direct marketing towards those target accounts is working towards the opportunistic non-target account inbound leads. And so you can learn a lot from that, what's going on there. Okay, we don't sometimes lose accounts. It's really good to know how what's going on there. And so here we have account loss, and then there's a lot of stuff that we can learn from these account losses. Budget, there's no budget, and so on, too early. Sometimes we want to refine what it means by too early. Sometimes prospects don't respond. Useful ones or went with a different solution. Okay, what solution did they go with? Those are really important things to learn from. Also, here's another chart from right inside Salesforce. This is around velocity, and you can do this is from one point in time, and you measure velocity in days, the average days between stages, and so you can see here that I like to look at demo to close, like how long does it take on average when you set up the demo? How long does it take to close? Here it's 54 days. Okay, we did planning, achieving, optimizing. Here's a couple charts around optimization. So this is around the marketing to sales handoff, MQA to SAA, and you can see here that's a pretty steady state. But really important again is what were the disposition reasons at that point in time. And so you can see, the green is junk data, oh boy, look in May 2016, a lot of junk data. So these are things that you can learn from, and you know, we try not to make the same mistake twice. Evaluating. Okay, so when we're evaluating, we are evaluating the impact of our various marketing campaigns on revenue. And you can see here on the left is a little bit of a complicated chart. It's got a line and a bar. The bar corresponds to the vertical axis on the right. Sorry, the line, did I just say that? The line corresponds to the vertical axis on the right, so all that blue, and the green corresponds to the vertical axis on the left. So this is, and you can see the horizontal axis. These are not individual campaigns, but campaign types. And you can see, for example, just look at go to the end, website form has a very high count, right? So there were a lot of instances or hits on that on the website, and kind of an average conversion rate. Conversely, the one next to it, a video demo, very high conversion rate, but not that many responses. So golly, if you could tweak that to had more people go into that video demo, maybe that would be helpful to the business. Okay, so that's on the right-hand side is influence model. This is really important. Also, you can see which types of campaigns here are influencing the revenue the most. What is big green? It's like website form again. Okay, so website form, even though it had an average conversion rate, because the volume was so high, it has a super big influence on the overall business. This is an account even spread model. So remember we were talking about contact roles. You can create models inside Salesforce that are based on contacts only, on the contact roles. But of course, we know that oftentimes we experience our sales teams don't add all the contacts to the opportunity. So sometimes it's better to do an account model. So you basically have every contact that's associated with an account included in the model. So what this does is it takes all of the revenue, right, all of the sales, and then it divides the sales among all of the campaigns that participated in that revenue. And so in this case, it's the people, right, that responded to the campaigns are associated with the account, and not just the ones that were put on the opportunity. So sometimes that works better for our for companies as a way to model that. Okay. This hereby concludes the webinar. Let me just summarize a little bit. The SiriusDecisions Demand Unit Waterfall is a fantastic new way of thinking about account-based marketing, particularly also helpful for companies that have complex selling product and selling models. You want to be able to track your funnel progressions using funnel metrics, using volume, velocity, and conversion rate methods. In this webinar, we talked about translating the Demand Unit Waterfall into Salesforce speak, and all of the Demand Unit Waterfall can be modeled in Salesforce. We've hopefully provided some examples of how to go about doing that. We also advise having some sort of consistent methodology. You know, we have made up one. We've developed one and are promoting that with our customers. It's turned out to be quite useful around planning, achieving, optimizing, and evaluating. And lastly, I encourage you all to learn more. We at Full Circle have an event coming up in September 14 and 15. That's Circulate here in San Francisco at the W Hotel. And head to the SiriusDecisions Tech Exchange later on in October to learn more. And just wanted to thank Terry and Ross for joining us on the webinar. It's really been awesome to continue our collaboration on how to help our friends who are in marketing and get better at what they do. And I'm going to turn this back over to Feng. I think there's a few questions. Hey, if you all have questions, type them on in, and we'll do our best to answer them.
All right. Thanks a lot, Bonnie. Thank you, Terry and Ross. Let's go back up here and look at the questions. So Jody here asks, are there ways to identify the demand unit at the active demand stage without buying a data vendor solution? I'm guessing this is for SiriusDecisions here. Terry and Ross?
I'll go ahead and take that one. So yeah, there's a number of ways to identify active demand without having a data solution. And so active demand, if we kind of just to review, is I'm getting signals that somebody's in market. They haven't directly identified themselves yet, but one very common way we see for active demand would be things like website visitor analysis. Right? I see that Acme is coming to my website. I see they're hitting these pages, and we can make some assumptions then that basically say, based on we've identified it's Acme and we see what they're doing, we can make some assumptions around what demand unit that we believe that interest is indicative of, just based on that simple mapping. So you definitely could add and supplement with additional data type insight, but you can start with active demand relatively simply leveraging just website insight.
Got it. Great. Thanks, Terry. Derek asks, this must be a full circle question. This is a slide on Bonnie's section. The account activity rating, could you describe what that is measuring, and is that available in Salesforce?
Yeah, so our account activity rating is, it's a full circle thing. And what we've done is we've built a metric right inside Salesforce that measures the responses to all the people at the account. So a sales rep can easily take a look at and see where the most activity is, where the least activity is.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bonnie. I believe we have time for one more question. We're reaching over the hour here. Mark asks, would you prioritize identifying the members of the demand unit at the active demand stage or the qualified demand stage? Earlier might be ideal, but sometimes not practical for my company. I'm guessing this is for SiriusDecisions as well.
Yeah, thanks. I think I can take this. So typically at the active demand stage, what we're dealing with is we're dealing with instances of demand that perhaps we can associate with a buying center or a company, but we don't yet have the name of an individual that we can associate it with. Once I get to engage demand, what I'm talking about is typically being able to identify one or more individuals that I can associate with the demand unit. And we can make different choices about how many individuals we have to be able to associate with that unit to progress from engaged demand into prioritized or even qualified demand. Now, a lot of it's going to be dependent on how you expect your buyers to buy and the level of qualification that you're ready to accept. So there are different decisions we can make about what's appropriate, but really assigning named individuals to demand units is something that begins at our engaged demand stage, and we would expect that demand units start to flesh out further and further as we get further down the waterfall.